The year is 1950. It was another cold winter night in Boston. The streets were slippery from the evening snow. Most people were already at home in their warm beds. But for some, the night was just getting started. Little did the employees of Brink's armored car company know, they were about to be part of one of the most infamous robberies in American history. 11 men were about to steal the modern equivalent of $33 million from the Brink's depot in a robbery that would make headlines across the country. This heist would come to be known as the Great Brink's Robbery. This is the inside story of their flawless plan, bold execution, and the perfect crime that still captivates decades later. To understand why this robbery was so legendary, we first need to learn about Brink's and how dominant they were in the security industry in the 1950s. Brink's started as a small armored car company in 1859. In the 20th century, they cornered the market by buying up competitors and establishing a sterling reputation for trustworthiness. Banks and companies entrusted them to securely transport money and valuables all over the country. Brink's armored trucks were thought to be impenetrable and immune to robberies. The company's reputation was so pristine that the public assumed any money in Brink's possession was absolutely safe from thieves. Surely no criminal would be bold or crazy enough to take on such a secure symbol of authority. That brings us to the mastermind of the Great Brink's Robbery, Tony Pino. Tony was a Boston North End gangster who had worked his way up from small-time crimes to running an organized crime operation. By the late 1940s, he was an experienced criminal looking for a big score to set himself up for life. When he started casing Brink's Boston headquarters, he became convinced that this reputedly impenetrable security operation could actually be robbed. Tony brought the idea to his friend and fellow Boston mobster, Vinny Costa. Vinny was initially skeptical, but started to be swayed when Tony explained his vision for infiltrating Brink's. The two men realized that pulling off a heist of this magnitude would require meticulous planning and a skilled team. They quietly recruited 9 other men over the next few months. The gang included top thieves like Joseph Speck O'Keefe, Stanley Gusciora, and Joseph Big Joe McGinnis. Between their skills, experiences, and inside connections, they actually had the needed tools to possibly pull off this bold heist. Tony Pino strategically planned the robbery for nearly 2 years before they were ready to strike. He cased the Brink's building tirelessly, gaining an intimate understanding of its layout, security measures, and people. The gang inspected Brink's trucks to find potential weak points for infiltration. They tracked the armored car routes throughout Boston to determine the optimal place and time to strike. Meticulous planning and preparation was critical, considering they would only have one chance to get this right. The ingenious part was the web of insider connections the gang cultivated. Through his mob connections, Tony got close to Brink's employees and gained insights critical to breaching their security. The most important insider connection was with Brink's guard and second-story man, Specs O'Keefe. O'Keefe got himself hired by Brink's and spent months gaining their trust while feeding info to Tony. What was needed is a foolproof escape plan with the loot. For the getaway vehicles, they sourced 2 stolen dark green Chevrolet sedans and a 1946 Ford panel truck to stow the cash. Panel trucks were common at the time, so it wouldn't raise suspicion. Brink's uniforms were acquired to pose as guards, and the robbers found a garage owned by underworld associate Vinny Costa in the North End to hide the vehicles before and after. The pieces were slowly being put into place. And while the gang spent nearly 2 years strategizing this heist, their patient planning was soon to pay off in a big way. The date was January 17th, 1950. The clock struck 5:15 p.m. Just as they had planned, 5 members of the gang entered the Brink's building at the corner of Prince Street and Commercial Street in Boston's North End. They wore navy blue coats and caps like Brink's uniforms to blend in as employees. Specs O'Keefe used his insider access as a guard to casually hold the door for the others and disable the alarm system. Once inside, they drew their pistols and got the drop on the employees. The robbers knew the routine perfectly from their planning. They knew that at this time the day's cash hauls would be stacked in the counting room, waiting to be stored in the vault overnight. There were mountains of cash, just waiting for the taking. The gang rounded up the employees and forced them to open the vault. They emptied all the cash into 7 large canvas bags. With speed and efficiency, they extracted over $2.7 million in cash from the vault, the equivalent of $33 million today. Their insider knowledge helped them quickly locate the keys to the employees' private lockers as well. They cleaned out the lockers and also stole several money pouches waiting to be deposited. In less than 30 minutes total, they had expertly pulled off the robbery and now had to make their getaway. The gang dragged the employees to the rooftop and handcuffed them to a utility pipe. This way, even if the employees triggered the alarm after they left, the police would waste precious time searching the roof before realizing the robbery. Just as smoothly as they entered, the gang exited the back of the Brink's building with the cash-laden bags. They had impersonated Brink's guards flawlessly. On the street, their inside man Specs O'Keefe passed himself off as a fellow guard and waved them right past police guarding the building. No one suspected a thing. In less than an hour, they had successfully infiltrated this secure fortress and robbed it blind. The gang casually loaded up 2 getaway cars with the bags of cash and vanished into the night. The police had no leads to pursue. If you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to like and subscribe. These videos take up a lot of time, and your support would help make more. The morning after the Great Brink's robbery, Boston was in an uproar. The public was stunned that such a reputable security company could be so thoroughly infiltrated and robbed. Brink's and the Boston police were scrambling to figure out who pulled off this brazen heist. With over $2.7 million stolen, it was the biggest robbery in the U.S. history at the time. The criminals had vanished without a trace, leaving law enforcement clueless. Later, the FBI joined the investigation to help track down the thieves. The Bureau was embarrassed that someone managed to comprehensively defeat Brink's security and breach one of their facilities. They felt they had to capture the robbers to save face. The authorities started by interviewing all Brink's employees extensively to try to identify suspects or uncover collaborators. They deduced the robbers must have had inside help, so they applied pressure on the employees they deemed suspicious. However, the gang's insider, Specs O'Keefe, played it cool during questioning and wasn't exposed. With no immediate leads, law enforcement had to go back and meticulously rebuild how the crime unfolded. The FBI forensics team scoured the Brink's building for any physical evidence the robbers may have left behind. They took fingerprints, studied entry points, and tried to identify the gang's tools and methods. But the expert thieves had been too careful, leaving very little for investigators to go on. The FBI tracked down witnesses who were near the scene at the time. They slowly pieced together descriptions of the getaway cars and other details about the robbers' appearance. But the gang had disguised themselves too well for any reliable identifications. With the robust planning beforehand, the gang didn't even need to case the scene in the days prior, which may have tipped off observers. With no actionable leads, the investigation stalled for several years. The robbers laid low, living off their shares of the cash while letting the heat die down. Finally, in 1956, the first break came. One of the minor players in the robbery, Joseph Big Joe McGinnis, was arrested on an unrelated charge. An informant told the FBI that McGinnis was spending big in prison, implying he had a large hidden bankroll. Under questioning, McGinnis cracked and ratted out his accomplices. McGinnis gave up everyone involved, exposing Specs O'Keefe as the inside man. Authorities leaned on O'Keefe hard, and he too decided to cooperate rather than face charges. With 2 key conspirators now singing, the rest of the gang was finally exposed. Most were arrested by 1958, almost a decade after the robbery. Though they escaped cleanly at first, no crime that big stays hidden forever. For their years evading capture, we have to credit the gang's meticulous planning and discipline. But ultimately, the law prevailed by following the money and turning accomplices against each other. In the end, The FBI estimated that only about $58,000 of the original $2.7 million haul was ever recovered. The rest was either seized from properties and businesses, or more likely, simply spent by the robbers over the years they were fugitives. The Great Brink's robbery allowed the gang to enjoy lives of comfort for years before justice caught up with them. Decades later, the Great Brink's robbery of 1950 remains one of the most legendary crimes in U.S. history. The scale of the score, the flawless execution, and years the gang spent enjoying freedom with their loot makes it an endlessly fascinating case. Tony Pino's vision led to a robbery that shocked the nation and created a new blueprint for executing the perfect crime. So, what are your thoughts on this historic case? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. I'll be back next week with another tale from the annals of true crime history. Until then, stay curious,